Hey folks, thanks for watching. It's September 23rd, it's Tuesday, and we're staring down at the infrared satellite loop of Typhoon Regasa. This has been a powerful typhoon over the weekend. In fact, it actually reached a peak strength that was stronger than, for example, Katrina's peak strength back in 2005. These West Pacific storms, these typhoons are often in a league of their own because the water temperatures are often the warmest on Earth. There in the West Pacific, they have that much more juice to grow. And unfortunately for mainland China now, this storm inching closer to some seriously large population centers in Southeast China. In fact, Hong Kong is not far away. On this map, we'll kind of circle that there. The Guangdong province, just to the northwest of that, and just, again, huge population center here. Now, fortunately, if you look closely at this loop, Regasa, the typhoon, has been moving to the northwest here this morning. But look at the shift west in just the last few slides. That was in the forecast, that shift to the west today, expected to make landfall at some point further to the west, just south of those kind of mainland population centers. Now, you do not often want to be on the northern flank of these storms in the northern hemispheres, both hurricanes in the Atlantic or typhoons over in the northwest Pacific, because as these storms move to the west or northwest, you can almost add that, you can really add that forward speed to the winds on the northern flank. We typically see the strongest winds on that side of the system. So those population centers still bracing for the impacts from this storm. Maybe not directly at landfall, but still plenty of damaging wind, rainfall, and flooding risk that will evolve over the next kind of 48 hours as the storm makes landfall there. Now, we implicated last week this uptick in typhoon activity. I can say I got that half of the forecast right, but there was this other half, the scenario that we discussed, where maybe one of these would recurve up into the Pacific jet stream and shake up this persistent pattern of warmth that we've seen across September. Eric kind of showed you that, since like that first week of September, how warm we've been across many acres, a lot of counties on the northern portions like the central U.S., even Canada. And we're just not seeing that kind of recurve action in the forecast. Another candidate, another typhoon we were watching for was, I believe, Neoguri here, east of Japan. I'm not going to try to pronounce that in a second time. And we're not really seeing that one recurve either. In fact, if we look closer today at that one, it's actually been weakening here on satellite, a lot less impressive than it was, just a few days ago. We'll get into that in the forecast, but again, not seeing, that major recurve that's really going to shake up the Pacific. The ECMWF AIFS does have something of a more, what I'll call a notable solution going forward, kind of the end of September, early October. But outside of that, the frost risk and that kind of cold weather risk, we're really, again, like Eric, I'll use the term kicking the can further into October at this point. We jump over and look at the Atlantic. That is also busy here. Gabrielle, Category 4 storm east of Bermuda. You can see that on the National Hurricane Center, but really that one is moving further to the east out to sea at that point. So I don't want to spend too much time on Gabrielle. I will briefly jump over the satellite imagery from Gabrielle out in the Atlantic. Is pretty awesome, frankly. I mean, that is a beautiful, powerful storm, Category 4. What's nice about this satellite loop that you can see here, unlike some of the other ones that we just watched, is there's no land, out in front of it or really anywhere on this map at this point. Bermuda is actually just off the screen here to the west. So this is what we like to see, beautiful imagery from these storms, but no, current or mainland risks for landfall here. If we jump over and look at the continental U.S., just the radar loop over the last 18 hours or so, see some showers and storms pushing through eastern Kentucky, portions of Tennessee, but really a lot of that convective activity, the focus has been over the Central Plains, eastern Kansas, man, all the storms and the thunder there over western Missouri as well, southeastern Nebraska over the last, through the overnight hours. Responsible for this is this upper level trough that's situated somewhere here over Colorado. It's helping to bring flow up from the Gulf, helping to focus those thunderstorm activities over the Central Plains. We're going to watch in this forecast that trough moving from the west to the east, bringing thunderstorm activity, even some severe chances further to the east, maybe even over into the Carolinas in the forecast here. I want to get into that, so just how dry they have been. We can see that if we just look up the jet stream, 500 millibar wind speeds, and the flow here, there's that trough over Colorado. It's hoping to focus that thunderstorm activity over eastern Kansas. There's Gabrielle, east of Bermuda, and can see those tropical waves that we need to watch here in the Atlantic. I will discuss these kind of way near the end of the video, kind of the last few slides, if you want to jump ahead to that. But really kind of right now the focus on this trough as it moves east through some drought-stricken areas. If we just look over like the last 30 days of rainfall, we've shown this a number of different ways, but just simply really across the whole month of September, the Carolinas, Tennessee Valley, the Ohio River Valley, much of the Midwest, even up into New England. As that trough moves east, bringing important rainfall to this area here, albeit kind of in the middle of the harvest window that's opening up here. I do want to jump back. We did see some storm reports yesterday, thanks to both that upper level trough over Colorado, some impressive hail reports over Iowa, at least for late September here, and then kind of some scattered wind reports in eastern Kentucky near the Ohio River Valley as well. But we did actually see some tornado reports up in northwest Michigan near like Traverse City, and there was even this picture of a tornado coming ashore off Lake Michigan. And this is near Torch Lake. You can see that just from that flag right there. And that is a fairly picturesque tornado, seemingly coming ashore here. Reports that it was lofting some trees as it sort of quote-unquote made landfall there in northwest Michigan. If we look at infrared satellite, again, you can see just all that cloud cover and the activity from that trough over the central part of the country. Otherwise, beyond that, northwest, south, even some areas to the east here, not as much of that cloud cover. Really, it's that trough kind of dominating the forecast here. Jump over and look at the HER. Let's see if we got the latest model. No, not yet. If we have the 6C HER here, let's play this a little bit forward. I want to make this current as of about 6 a.m. Central. That's roughly when I'm recording this here. See all that convection, thunderstorms across Tennessee, Kentucky, eastern Kansas. So I play this forecast forward through this morning. There's noon Central. Look at central Missouri getting in some of this heavy rainfall here, even southwest Iowa, getting over toward the Mississippi River Valley. And finally through eastern Missouri, heavy rain, thunderstorm activity all the way through much of the state here. Kind of almost like this trough is just singling out the state of Missouri for heavy rainfall here through this afternoon. That pushes into Illinois, portions of Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana, Arkansas through this evening after sunset, and then pushing east into the Ohio River Valley from there. Keeping an eye on Arkansas today for some severe weather. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Before tomorrow, like midday tomorrow, you can see that activity now pushing to the south and pushing to the east as that trough goes from Colorado, more so over Kansas. So now our flow is like that on Wednesday, and then you can even kind of assume by Thursday it's going to look something like that. If we just look at the 3-kilometer dam forecast, I just took the rainfall forecast all the way out over the next 60 hours to get us through Thursday morning at this point, and you can see all the heavy rainfall. Anywhere we have those like purple colors where you're getting close, if not above 2 inches here. We're kind of a wide corridor through the Mississippi, through the Ohio, and through the Tennessee valleys here. Again, kind of overlapping a wide stretch of those precipitation deficits that we just outlined. Now, to get further out into the forecast, I'll do that in a second here. Before I do, I did want to touch on the SPC, highlighting an area here in eastern Oklahoma, northeast Texas, portions of Arkansas. Kind of often call this the Arklatex area here. And could see some severe storms here today. Just a slight risk, but it's something to watch. And then tomorrow on Wednesday, that activity shifting further east and then ultimately all the way over into the Carolinas here, kind of leading up to additional rainfall chances there. I do want to jump over to the SPC really quickly. Before I do that, I will mention the excessive rainfall outlook, a slight risk for flooding here across Arkansas, southern Missouri, along the Ohio River Valley. That shifts further to the east tomorrow over the Ohio River Valley, and then ultimately weakening that flooding risk as we go. But now I'm going to jump over to the SPC because I believe the day 2 may have updated to a slight risk. Nope, not yet. But watching kind of this corridor here for those severe storms tomorrow. I'm going to jump over, look at a little bit of a different product to identify this trough here. This is the ECMWF 500 millibar vorticity. That is a fancy term that we use for spin in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. So I'll make this valid about 7 a.m. And there's this, what we call this PV stream, or this filament of it here, kind of often caught between some of these ridges and the troughs. But really, it's this upper level low here that we're watching, this kind of area of vorticity over Colorado. You'll actually see it organize a little bit as we go through the day on Wednesday. Kind of combines with some weak troughing over the Midwest. And so by late Wednesday, this trough is here over the middle Mississippi River Valley. And then through Thursday, pushing further to the east, you can actually see it kind of flattening out. That tends to weaken ascent for rainfall. So that's why you saw that excessive rainfall outlook. We didn't see that slight risk extended all the way over the Carolinas, although I do expect rainfall to fill into this area in the forecast. We'll talk about why in just a second. That kind of spins up here, get another piece of it on Saturday afternoon. And then mid-level spin, there's another meteorological phenomenon that can produce that. and potentially some tropical systems that we'll need to talk about in the forecast here. I did want to show that trough kind of moving to the west of the east, kind of cuts off this weekend, Saturday and Sunday. And it's actually a combination of maybe this troughing here and a tropical system coming out of the Atlantic that could bring quite a bit of rainfall to the Carolinas, at least in this forecast scenario. Now, I've taken this forecast all the way out to Sunday. Look at this upper level ridge that builds in. North of this kind of weak low that could bring some monsoon-like showers and storms to the southwest. Showers and storms expected here. Heavy rainfall potentially if a tropical system gets closer and closer to the Carolinas late on Sunday and Monday. But to the north, warmth and drier conditions settling back in behind this troughing. That's moving kind of out of this corridor here. So more of the same in the forecast, getting closer to late September. Not seeing that kind of, what we talked about, that recurve action from a typhoon kicking out this persistent ridging. We do see that troughing over here in the North Pacific. We don't even need to expand the domain. You can just see all the vorticity over here, likely keeping those water temperatures cooler. I will play this forecast out with respect to precipitation here. Let's make this valid as of where we're at here, about 7 a.m. on Tuesday morning. You can see the rainfall associated with that upper level trough there over Kansas that we just looked at. There's those weak showers and storms that are currently ongoing in eastern Kentucky and Tennessee. Playing that forecast through the day today. Again, there's Missouri getting highlighted, pushing further east through tomorrow morning into portions of Illinois, Tennessee, and Ohio River valleys. Tomorrow afternoon through Mississippi, Alabama, Ohio, stretch here. Take this forecast into Thursday. Remember that trough's weakening a bit on Thursday, so Thursday afternoon we don't see as heavy of rainfall getting over into the Carolinas or the southeast, although still pretty decent chances here all the way up through New England, through some areas that have built up drought classifications. Pushing through on Friday afternoon, just kind of weak precipitation now lingering along the Gulf Coast states. But remember that low cuts off a bit, at least from the ECMWF here, Georgia, South Carolina, now getting some better rain as that cutoff low gets a little bit better spin, better ascent for rainfall over the Carolinas this weekend, and then potentially combining with, at least right now, what it looks like a weak tropical system on the ECMWF. Some of the model runs taking this a little bit stronger. But all the while, a number of significant rainfall chances for the mid-Atlantic and the Carolinas in the forecast at this point. There's that weak low that we saw over the southwest over the weekend, bringing cutoff low chances for precipitation for like Arizona, Utah, New Mexico. And then that troughing across the North Pacific, bringing rain chances into like the Vancouver area this weekend as well. But to the north, like the middle part of the country, warmer and drier settling back in. Folks getting back out into the fields and harvesting here. I'm taking the forecast further into next week. You don't see a lot going on with a lot of that activity either here over British Columbia, some of that tropical activity here, maybe a weak low developing like middle of next week, bringing rain chances to the middle part of the country over toward the Canadian prairie. But I had to take the forecast all the way out to 10 hours to get that. If we look at the 5-day precipitation anomaly, you can see that trough making its way east across the eastern 2/3 of the country, anywhere from like Kansas up through New England, even into Ontario, which I'll include in kind of those drier corridors here over into Michigan. There's that weak low setting up over the weekend over the southwest, bringing rainfall there. If we take this out to 7 days, you can see the precipitation increase early next week for Carolinas when it might be contending with that tropical system. Heavier rain, again, getting towards southern British Columbia here. If we take the forecast 4 to 10 days out and we eliminate some of this rainfall here from the forecast that's expected over the next 4 days, we just go from 4 to 10 and see how much drier we're going in the middle part of the country, and then kind of summing it all together, there's the 10-day precipitation. And what we haven't seen while we kind of shift back over into that warmer and drier pattern in the middle part of the country, kind of waiting on that first big frost. Here's Neoguri. I talked about this in the beginning. You can kind of see it here. If I take this forecast forward, it just kind of sits here, weakens in the North Pacific. It's not recurving up into the jet stream. So as I play this jet stream forecast out from the ECMWF, it actually tries to re-strengthen here at one time, but we continue to see troughing here over the Gulf of Alaska. There's that low pressure system helping to stir up the cooler waters there, ridging downstream of that to the east. Often when you're cooling off the waters here, you're warming the land here over the central part of the country. That's why Eric and I always watch this area in summer. If it goes cooler, we worry about heat and drought over the middle of the country. If it's fall, we worry about 70s and dry weather. And that's the case in the forecast. Even getting out further into the forecast, this is now October 1st. Still seeing troughing here across the Northeast Pacific, widespread ridging across the continental U.S., and our rain chances kind of reserved for these little cutoffs or tropical systems sneaking in underneath that. If If we look at the panels for long-range temperature chances, next 5 days is the left side of this row here. Warmth across much of North America outside of the influence of some heavier rainfall. And that continues in week 2. Warmer conditions, very little frost risk, maybe over here in parts of New England. But look at all the warmth across the middle part of the country. That extends into the 10 to 15 day from the ECMWF ensembles. Plenty of warmth across much of the North American continent, save for the influence of the troughing over Alaska and the Northwest. Pretty similar forecast from the GFS, a little bit cooler over in New England, again cooler in Alaska, parts of northern Canada. I'd mentioned the fact that we often have to cool off this area first to get these major shots of autumn in the middle part of the country. So at least the GFS playing a little bit closer to that pattern. But the ECMWF AFS is kind of out on an island right now, keeping a lot of warmth up in this area here. It has been pretty anomalous in the forecast. I'll talk about why that is in just a second here. But we're kind of waiting to see in the pattern. Eric talked about this yesterday, this Climate Prediction Center, their week 3 to 4 temperature outlook from the 4th through the 17th, kind of the early half of October. This chance, I posed the chance for this scenario last week that if we saw one of these recurving typhoons, perhaps early October, had that first big autumn blast. But at this point, again, kicking the can down the road is the appropriate term for just waiting to see. It's wait and see at this point to see when we'll have that first big shot of autumn. I can't put it together in the forecast right now. It doesn't help that the MJO is pretty weak and doesn't have a tell, I think, right now at all in terms of what's driving this pattern into early October. Want to zoom in and look at the 8 to 14 day precip outlook. British Columbia, the Pacific Northwest, seeing some increased precipitation chances there. We also see that on the Climate Prediction Center because of that troughing across the Northeast Pacific, but across much of North America, much of the Canadian prairie, at least the southern, maybe like 2/3 of it or 3/4 drier in the long term. This is taking us from October 1st out through the 7th. I mentioned the AIFS from the ECMWF kind of on an island on its own. And the reason for that, if we jump over and look at that North Pacific jet stream from the AIFS, I take this forecast forward and through this weekend, it brings this very deep trough all the way down to like San Francisco. And it's been really kind of the only model pulling that trough all the way down there. And that means as we get out to like October 1st, this takes us all the way through this week into like early next week. It actually produces a trough here in the central part of the country. And then does a similar scenario all the way out that next week, and another trough here. This one over Wyoming actually brings ridging up into the northwest. That's why it went warmer in that 10 to 15 day. That's why in the 8 to 14 day precip, it's bringing a lot more precip into this area here, even into like Northern California. I mentioned all the way down to like San Francisco because of how deep those troughs were digging into California. We'll see if that's the case. Again, it's on an island, so a little bit less confidence in that scenario right now, but it is in there in the forecast. But even that forecast is warm for a lot of this area with the troughing there across the west. I mean, we're warm across much of this area in the ECMWF AFS forecast. I mentioned the MJO, not really a big driver right now. If you could find any kind of pattern in it, it would be maybe well out into the forecast, trying to push further into like phases 1 and 2 as we get toward October. Those tend to, at least phase 1 and 2 in early October, tend to help build up some of that colder temperature or that risk in Canada. So perhaps a cooler signal for the Canadian prairie as we get further into October. And that's that kind of check mark that we often wait to see in fall. Do we at least cool off our reservoir of cold air that could then spill out, which would be the second part of that scenario, into the middle part of the country? But we're still talking about, weak chances or not obvious chances for the first part of that setup, that first checkbox. So it's hard to kind of get into the conversation of the second one until that happens. And even if we look at the Havmuller diagrams, where is a lot of this ascent going out in the forecast? Well, it's not clear. The MJO has often in August and September been over here in the far western Pacific, if not the eastern Indian Ocean. Aside from some of these Kelvin waves which have snuck through, we saw one come through recently which helped spark up Gabrielle and the two systems that I'm going to talk about in just a second here. But even out into the forecast, it lingers here in the East Pacific, lingering over the kind of the maritime continent. This activity here likely what we're seeing with Regasa, but it's not obvious, where this is going. This forecast has been clearer this year, and it's definitely going to be here. It's definitely going to shift out into the West Pacific, track through phases 6, 7, and 8. That's not clear from this forecast, other than just typically kind of lingering weakly somewhere here over in the West Pacific, the maritime continent, or far eastern Indian Ocean. If I take the forecast, this is the probability of reaching temperatures below 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees Celsius. I've been doing this kind of for the last 2 weeks, and we haven't seen a lot of colors show up on this map outside of the mountain ranges. I will say, as I get further out into October, see here, over in the Canadian Maritimes, for our northern Canadian Maritimes, and finally through like the 5th, 6th, and 7th, I mentioned that scenario playing out where we cool off this area first before we cool off the middle part of the country, and at least seeing little hints of that. But again, all the way out here on October 7th at this point, and it's not like these are significant, freeze probabilities. We're still down here at like 20 to 40%, all the way out on October 7th. Just impressive warmth coming from Canada. I do want to mention the 2 tropical disturbances that I alluded to at the beginning of this video. There's actually 2 of them, one here near the Lesser Antilles and one to the east. So we're watching both of these at this point. Let's see if I can get there's the National Hurricane Center, the outlook. Again, one near the Windward Islands, one further to the east over the central Atlantic. And at least for North Carolina in this weekend, this kind of leading storm is naturally the one we're going to focus on. And if we look at some of the ensemble forecast, I'm plotting this one here from the ECMWF. It has the system slowly over the next kind of 3 days through this week trying to develop. It's going to struggle. We'll talk about why that is. But as it gets closer to the mainland U.S., it's going to come under the influence of those troughs that we talked about. And those could help steer it up in North Carolina. This forecast is all the way out to Sunday. So this has it somewhere here east of Florida, southeast of South Carolina. As I take the forecast forward, a number of these lows get very close, kind of the Outer Banks in North Carolina. Some of these even kind of taking it over landfall. And there is this scenario where it could actually strengthen in the lead up to making landfall because of that trough. As it kind of hybridizes or gets absorbed into the jet stream flow, that can actually like briefly strengthen a weak tropical storm to the point where bringing some stronger winds and certainly flooding risk to North Carolina at this point. Big precipitation deficits and big droughts often end in floods, so that's always kind of concern. We see that playing out in the forecast here. A system behind it you can see developing slowly, potentially by this point. This forecast valid Monday, September 29th at this point, strengthening into some of these a much stronger system, roughly 6 days from now, but still well out to sea at this point. Hard to say where it's going to go after that, because we do have that trough over the eastern part of the country where if it stays there, I know this map's getting very busy at this point, but this scenario kind of taking that second system more out to sea, and then maybe at this point by next week we'll have to be talking about another system here. The reason for that kind of complicated forecast right now, so if we look at these 2 systems, here's number 1, here's number 2. We have an upper level low spinning here north of the Greater Antilles, Hispaniola, Puerto Rico. You can see that spinning very vigorously here. So that's actually not our area of disturbance that we're watching. It's down here. But as that moves toward the northwest, it's going to be under the influence of some shear on the eastern side of that trough. That's going to slow development as it pushes to the northwest. We actually have a anticyclone here. You can see this in this darker, drier colors here. And that's right now imparting some westerly shear over both of these systems, which is why if you look at the cirrus clouds kind of on the eastern flank of these systems, see how they're all going that way or like that way. So there's this kind of westerly, northwesterly, or westerly shear. So these are going to struggle to strengthen quickly over the next few days. Conditions could get a little bit better as it gets closer to the coastline under the influence of this trough, not for like proper tropical development, but kind of this brief kind of near to the landfall strengthening that could occur near North Carolina. Again, a weak system at this point from the Euro, makes landfall at least from the European model somewhere here near like Cape Hatteras, Norfolk area, and then that system recurving out to sea with heavy rain chances in North Carolina. Again, we'll get to that in the forecast when we get to it. We're still 6, maybe 5, 6 days out from landfall. We're talking somewhere like Monday morning if we do get that storm all the way over here in the west. There's even some scenarios that are taking that first system out to sea. I'll leave it there today. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk with you all on Thursday.